Good evening once again, everybody. Welcome back to another Hoops HD off-season podcast. This is our August sessions or our August podcast. I'm your host, Chad Sherwood, streaming to you live, as always, from the heart of Big Ten country here in New Jersey. Joining us, some of our usual panel. Let me start to my left, probably on the right on the bottom of most of your screens, with John Titel back. John T., how are you doing? How's everything going?
Enjoying summer vacation, but cannot wait for the off-season to become the on-season.
We are getting closer and closer, as you mentioned just there. In fact, as we record this right now here on Wednesday evening, we are 78 days, 15 hours, and 49 minutes, and 37 seconds away from the tip-off of the 2016-17 college basketball season.
Yeah.
Big exciting news. Down to the second, you can check out our countdown on the website, hoopshd.com. And with the clock ticking there, let me turn over to John Stalika. John S., how are you doing? Our Big East correspondent from the heart of Big Ten country there, right?
Yep. Also the heart of American, the gateway to the South, whatever you want to call this place.
Soon to be Big 12 country, too, if the Cincinnati rumors are there. But we've got a lot to get to also, and one more correspondent with us is, oh wait, no, Joby's not with us, so that covers everybody.
I'm here.
Oh, David Griggs is with us. Yes, I knew I forgot somebody. David,
yeah, I'm here.
David, how are you? And most importantly, how is the Griggs for President campaign going?
It's going a little bit slow. I was hoping it would pack. When you look at how crazy both candidates are and how well they're doing, it doesn't make any sense that I'm not beating both of them.
And have we got you into the debates yet?
We're close. We're just 5% away.
5% away. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're working on that. You may see him up there. Hillary Clinton, maybe Donald Trump if he shows up at the debates, and David Griggs to debate
If Donald
the
Trump
topics.
does not show up, I will take his place, and I bet I do just as good as he does.
Okay. We try not to get too political here, but so let's keep moving things on here and actually get into some of the topics here. And we are just a few days away from the end of the Summer Olympics here, which was a rare chance we get once every 4 years to have, I was going to say meaningful, but I'll at least say basketball games played during the summer. How meaningful they are or not, given how much better Team USA is than anybody else in the entire world is maybe up for debate. But I got a chance to see a fair amount of the Olympics. And John T., let me start with you on this. Was there anything you took away from Team USA's men's performance at the Olympics this year?
Well, my takeaway is that when they're playing on all cylinders, we are the best in the world by a large margin, even without Curry, LeBron, etc. Unfortunately, if we're not battling on all cylinders, then we have problems. We dominated in the gold medal game, beat Serbia by 30. The three previous games, Serbia, France, and Spain, combined winning margin, 12 points. I mean, come on, USA.
Yeah, and that was probably the most concerning thing for me, was just that it was not the domination that we thought it should be. And John S., do you think maybe it was because you didn't have LeBron and Steph Curry there, or do you think maybe it was simply they didn't really care too much? They were too much enjoying going to the swim meets and partying up on the yacht they were staying on and that type of thing?
I don't think it was the superstars so much as not having enough time to really gel. But at the same time, let's not forget, it's not just the Olympics every 4 years. You also have the FIBA World Championships, which they now call the World Cup, which also takes place in, 2014, and 2018 is supposed to be next with Greg Popovich taking over as the head coach for Team USA.
Right, and that's the point we wanted to get to here in just 1 second. But before I get there, David, I don't know how much the Olympics you got to catch, but aside from the men's team taking the gold medal and really only gelling probably in that final game against Serbia, the women's team, on the other hand, for Team USA, looked unbelievably dominant. I don't think a single game was close for even more than a quarter. Are we just that much better than the rest of the world in basketball? I guess we are. Let me throw it out to you.
We won the gold medal, and I know we had some close calls, but if we were, like say it were soccer, and we were really trying to field the absolute best basketball team we could. This is not the team we would have fielded. So we won the gold medal without our best foot forward. And well, I'll save this for the final thought, but since there is a world championship of basketball, I was unaware that they even changed it to the World Cup. Should the Olympics use pro players? Should the Olympics be the equivalent of a world championship if there's already a professional world championship? And I would be in favor of sending college players every 4 years.
Okay, well, John, let me throw that question over to you. Would you favor that as well? Let's go back to the model we had at one point where was no professionals allowed.
Could you be more specific?
John T.
Yes, I'm a big fan of the college players. This is their chance to have their international glory, and I understand that it didn't work back in the 80s, and we lost in 88, and the heavens fell, and then we had to put the dream team together, but it's not always about winning. It's nice to have these college kids have a chance. I wouldn't mind throwing out Denzel Valentine and Perry Ellis and a bunch of college seniors who are ready to make the leap to the NBA and are seasoned, and I think they could get it done. I don't know if they could get it done, but I'd like to give them the chance.
Well, so are you kind of saying maybe we should make an exception for kids that may have just been recently drafted and haven't yet played in the NBA but do have pro contracts?
It gets a little stickier, and I mean, I'm not opposed to a one and done, and I'm not opposed to a guy who's still in college like Grayson Allen, but I wouldn't mind putting out an all-senior team because I think you'd have a lot of veteran leaders with 4 years of college experience, so that obviously Popovich isn't a college coach, but I think that it could be a nice blend.
Yeah,
it's funny that you mentioned Grayson Allen because I don't know how international players would take to being tripped intentionally by him.
I think it would be hilarious. Well, anyway, and it's just, what is the Olympics? Now, the World Cup, World Championship of basketball, of course, that is a world championship. You want your pro players out there. You want the best ones out there. But in the Olympics, it's not a world championship, or it shouldn't be, in my opinion. It isn't of the same nature. It isn't of the same spirit. So why not put college players out there? And who cares if you don't win? Not that you don't want to win, but it isn't a world championship. It's the Olympics.
Well, the other question, though, is there is a ratings issue here, and I know there is a world championship, but quite honestly, very few people probably watch it, especially compared to the viewership you get for the Olympics. And here you got a chance to throw, theoretically, a LeBron James, Stephen Curry team out there in the Olympic Games that everybody's going to be watching. And I could see the appeal of that, especially from a broadcaster like NBC or even the International Olympic Committee that wants to have these names out there. But one other issue, I guess, on the Olympics, and John S., let me go back to you on this because you mentioned Popovich taking over. Coach K is done with the Olympics. This was his first final year coaching the Olympic team. But his assistant coach, which is always kind of neat to see during the course of the Olympics, Jim Boeheim there on the sidelines with Coach K coaching it. A little bit mentioned I heard today that he may come back as an assistant coach if Popovich is willing to bring him on. And any thoughts on that and how strange it was to see the two of them on the sideline together?
Well, I suppose it does seem strange on a couple levels, but at the same time, he did have some familiarity with one of the Team USA members in Carmelo Anthony. But I think there was also, Tom Thibodeau and a few other notable assistants to at least relate to some of the older players on the Team USA roster.
It's going to be interesting just to see how the two of them react to each other heading into when Duke and Syracuse play this season as well.
But then again, Duke and Syracuse haven't exactly been longtime rivals either.
Yeah, and Boeheim was on the staff for the World Championships, wasn't he?
Was he?
Okay,
again, I didn't watch him, so. But
it's not like, let's say, Mike Krzyzewski would have been on Dean Smith's staff back in 1976 or 1984, which would have really been weird.
Well, I guess, since Syracuse joined the ACC, that's almost been the new premier matchup that at least ESPN has been trying to throw at us, Duke and Syracuse. This is the two great teams, the new great rivalry they're trying to build in the ACC, I guess, to maybe replace Duke, Maryland. But let's move on to a few other pieces of news and notes. And John T., let me start with you. We had a couple of notable figures that passed away recently, and Michael Brooks was one of them. I know you want to discuss this a little bit here.
Yeah, I don't know how many people know about him. Obviously, when you think about LaSalle basketball, you think of the legends like a Tom Gola or a Lionel Simmons, who are among the greatest rebounders and scorers, respectively, in the history of the sport. Brooks died on Monday in Switzerland. He had a stroke. His numbers in college were staggering: 2,600 points, 1,300 rebounds. In 1980, the National Player of the Year. He still remains in the top 30 all time in the NCAA in scoring, despite having played in the 80s and 70s. In 1980, for the Olympics, he was actually chosen as captain of Team USA. As we all know, the American boycott didn't really have that end well. He was picked ninth overall in the 1980 NBA draft by San Diego, a couple spots ahead of Kiki Vandeweghe. He had a solid pro career, only 6 seasons in the NBA, 13 points and 6 boards a game. He died tragically, I believe, in his late 50s, so he'll be missed, but I think it's fair to call him a legendary college player.
He was, and he is somebody that missed and just was taken from us way too soon. And unfortunately, he's not the only one. John S., I know you mentioned this in our notes before we came on the air, Cornette as well.
This would be Joel Cornette from Butler, who I think was 35 when he had died of natural causes. But it's also another blow to the Butler family, which has already had Andrew Smith and I think one of the coach's infant sons, whose name is escaping me at the moment. But as for Cornette, he was on a couple of NCAA tournament teams around the turn of the century, including the 2001 Butler team that demolished Wake Forest in round one for Thad Matta's only year at Butler. So for both Cornette and Brooks, may they rest in peace.
Absolutely. A few other pieces of news here, I guess. A couple of in the injury news, Dylan Brooks with an off-season injury. I believe we're talking Oregon, right? Oregon State. I just slipped on this.
Well done, Chad.
Thank you, David.
Deliver.
David, since I know you've been following this news intently, why don't you fill us in on this?
Well, I just I just hate that he's been injured.
John T. I just threw that, David, because I knew he didn't have the answer. But John, let me throw it over to you.
I don't know if I can fill in many more blanks than that, but yes, he was Ducks' leading scorer last year. Out indefinitely, they announced the other day, due to left foot surgery. It's only August, so there's still plenty of time for him to rehab and start the season strong, or still make it back by conference play. When you think about it, this now could be, unfortunately, the leading scorer for each of the 4 number 1 seeds from last March could be out. So 3 of them are no longer in college: Perry Ellis, Bryce Johnson, Malcolm Brogdon. Brooks was the 4th. I hope he makes it back, but if not, then who knows who's the new 4 number 1 seeds are going to be next March.
Well, that's one of the beauties, I think, of college basketball. Not the injuries, but just the fact that these kids you become the best player of your team and then you graduate, or you go on to the NBA because you leave early, which is more likely these days. Another piece of news out, Andrew White III, one of the last remaining major transfers who is not fully committed. And here we are, August 24th, still talking Syracuse or VCU, I believe, are the 2 picks that I've heard. Very late in the season to be down to this, though, also, John. Sorry, John T.
He is. He finished his education in Nebraska, so he's a graduate transfer, which means he can play immediately, although obviously, like you said, it is going right down to the wire. Syracuse VCU, it's hard to imagine the legendary Will Wade beating out Jim Boeheim for a recruit, but who knows what White's priorities are. He's a great scorer, about 20 points a game, so I think he can fit right in and start and score for a team, even in a high major conference, but it'll be interesting to see if he goes with Richmond or Syracuse. Richmond, Virginia, of course, not Richmond University.
And David, given that he's coming from Nebraska, where your running mate is the head coach,
right? Well, he's making a huge mistake. Like, he never should have graduated. That is just a fatal flaw. And if he did graduate, he should have just remained at Nebraska. They've got grad programs there. I checked. There is the matter of classes starting very, very soon. So if he doesn't pick one quick, he might not end up anywhere.
Well, I expect we will have a decision maybe in the next couple of days here from him. And as you said, the classes you got to get enrolled. You're going to be, I don't know, all the classes will be full by the time you even enroll in the school.
Right. And grad programs are a little tricky. I don't know specifically VCU and Syracuse. I'm sure they can find a home for him, but some of these programs don't want to enroll someone if they don't think they're serious about finishing. This is all kidding aside, and that's not to say that he isn't serious about grad studies. I have no idea, but there have been issues where kids wanted to go to a school, but they couldn't get a grad program at that school to accept them. It's not the same as enrolling as an undergrad.
And it's not the same as going to North Carolina either, where you don't even have to go to class.
No, yeah, I mean, there's always that. Or, I mean, he wouldn't have to go to a class in Nebraska. I just think he should go back to Nebraska.
It's like
Let's not
John S.
forget one of the other caveats as it relates to graduate transfers. The school he's enrolling at has to have a program that wasn't offered at his original school. So let's say Nebraska cannot have a forestry program if that's what he wants to attend at Syracuse or VCU or whatever.
A forestry program at Nebraska, the land of the forest. Wow.
Okay, we've now reached the point where we're discussing forestry classes at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. So everyone out there in Lincoln, if you happen to see a tree, that's your forestry program.
Right.
But let's discuss a few other topics here. And actually, John T, I seem to keep throwing things back to you here, but the next thing up on my list as well, you've been posting a few articles over the last almost 2 weeks now, I guess almost 3 weeks, about your attendance at the National Sports Collectors Convention right in my backyard here in Atlantic City. In fact, John and I met up for dinner one night. I didn't go to the convention myself, but maybe you can fill us in a little bit about the convention, especially for those who've been reading the articles and want to know a little bit more about it.
I'd be happy to. So it's a convention that lasts 5 days every summer, and it switches locations every year. So I believe it started in the Midwest in the, I think, 70s or 80s. So there's a lot of Chicago and Cleveland area conventions, but every so often they grace us here on the East Coast with their presence. So I got to go to Baltimore a few years ago, AC last month, and it'll be back in AC, I believe, in 2019. Next July in Chicago, for anybody who wants to put it on their calendar. Can't recommend it enough. It is, if you're a collector of anything sports related, they have one of everything. Any sports, photos, autographs, cards, balls, jerseys, everything. I'll try to show my prized possession that I picked up, although I'm sure it's not going to work out too well. It is a Penn football pennant. And as you can see, it says Penn. Thank you. It says Penn University, which, as all people know, is totally incorrect, as we are the University of Pennsylvania. I've contacted the Penn Athletic Department to figure out if I have this $1 million once-in-a-lifetime treasure or just some knockoff, and they've not gotten back to me yet, so I assume it's the latter.
Yeah.
Keep hope alive.
And just to build on that, we will be submitting some Hoops HD memorabilia to the convention next year.
Well, I was actually going to ask John T if he saw any David Griggs autographed memorabilia, tickets, maybe
all
a computer, all sold out.
Yeah.
Restraining orders.
Restraining orders.
Yeah.
Okay, let's. I want to turn back for a second now to back at the top of the show. We spoke a little bit about the Olympics, and I had a chance to watch a fair amount of the Olympics. In fact, not just the basketball, but several other sports. And I know that none of you are going to agree with me on this, and I'm fighting a huge uphill battle just to get the three of you to agree with me and go beyond that.
Chad, don't do it. I read your email. Don't do it.
There are a lot of sports out there that use the idea of a running clock. Soccer, the most famous of them, with this, not even just a running clock, but they keep the clock running, and at the end of the game, the referee magically adds amount of time on that nobody knows when the game's even going to end. And I won't get into that, how stupid I think that is. That's for another show at another time. But all these other sports out there, water polo, field hockey, rugby sevens, they were all using almost all of them were using a running clock of a sort where it would stop for timeouts and injuries, what they don't do in soccer. But they use this idea of a running clock, and it keeps the game moving, and it keeps the same pace of the game from the start of the game to the end of the game. And I just want to throw this out there because I started thinking about this more and more. And maybe something I got to flesh out a little more, and I'll post something about it in writing on the site at some point this season. But would a running clock work in basketball. And I'm not talking a 20-minute. We'll probably have to do like a 40 or 45-minute halves or 20-minute quarters or something of the like. But one of the biggest problems I have with watching a basketball game is all the downtime you keep having. Somebody gets fouled, and it's a minute and a half later before the ball gets inbounded again. Or somebody's out of bounds, and now there's a 2-minute fight while substitutions are happening, and people are moving, and the referee's got to move somebody from one spot to another spot, and pushing and shoving, and whistles here and there. If we use some sort of running clock where however quickly you can get the ball back in, you can keep the game going and keep the pace moving. Now, I know it would completely change the end game scenario, because if you use a running clock and someone gets fouled, the team that's ahead gets fouled, they're going to run the clock out sitting there shooting free throws. And I know that'll be a complete change in the game, and I understand that. And maybe there's a workaround with that. But then again, is the sport of basketball really about being fouled and shooting free throws, or is it about offensive sets and defensive sets? And if we had something like a running clock, maybe you don't have the fouls at the end of the game. Maybe you have a better product. David, I'll throw it over to you here, and then I know John T. wants to chew my head off as well. But
well, it's an interesting idea. I hate to admit this, but I think you've identified one of the problems, and that is the constant stalling and stopping in the game. Now, what I don't think you've done is come up with anything that would be considered sane as far as how to fix that problem. I hate replay. I mean, I realize it's necessary, but in my opinion, I like the standard of indisputable video evidence, and I've said this before. After 60 seconds, if you are still not sure, then by definition, there is a dispute. It's not indisputable, so whatever call was made on the floor should stand, and we need to get on with the game. I hate 3 and 4 and 10-minute stoppages so we can watch the refs watch television. I mean, that's horrible. And then the fouls at the end of the game, I agree. No one likes a foul parade, but I think that, like, we don't call them intentional fouls anymore. We call them flagrant fouls. But I think that an intentional foul should be just that. If you're intending to foul, if you are making no effort to play defense at all, then they should call it a flagrant or an intentional. It should be 2 shots on the ball. I think those are 2 ways to keep it going. As far as the running clock, I kind of like it, but I think it should be 2 20-minute halves. We run the clock when the ball's in play, and the only time we stop it is when it goes out of bounds, when there's a foul, or when there's a timeout.
Okay, so you won't want any changes. But John T., let me throw it over to you. Am I off my rocker here?
Yes. Well,
I said John T. You're not John T.
That's a separate question. Your original question was, could it work? And the answer is yes, it could. Are you off your rocker? Not totally, but you're perilously close to the edge. So it could work in that if they put that rule in tomorrow, I don't think I would stop watching. I don't think the game would get less exciting, et cetera, et cetera. However, I'm a big believer in ain't broke, don't fix. I'm a big believer in the fact that they have enough new rules that they're not used to. The 2 that come to the mind is that there was one game where it was a close game late. Klay Thompson had the ball, and I think he had fallen to one knee and was going to call a timeout. And apparently in the Olympics, the players can't call a timeout, only the coach. He almost got a technical that almost cost us the game, but luckily he didn't. Number 2, the thing where if it hits off the top, hits off the rim and bounces up, you can knock it away, and it's not goaltending. That's just something that's hard to teach because your whole life in America you're taught that it is goaltending. So I understand you don't have to necessarily teach someone how to play with a running clock, but the other thing I like is that when they have timeouts in the NBA, all they'll show is the coach giving like his motivational, like, come on guys, play good defense. In the Olympics, you get to see the Australian guy like drop a play and talk it over. I wish I knew more languages. I could understand what the Spanish coaches and other ones would say. But I think that that's a great thing, that if there was no running clock, we might miss out on that.
I thought for a moment there you were going to say you didn't know what you didn't understand the language the Australia guys were speaking, but John has any thoughts on the subject or anything else you think may solve some of these delays we do have in the games?
I thought you were going to mention possibly adding stoppage time to basketball games, which really make buzzer beaters an interesting chore, because as a Xavier fan, I would certainly not have minded an additional 3 minutes after watching Wisconsin get that game-winning shot. Although on a more serious note, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to gradually gravitate more towards some of the FIBA and international rules. You could possibly go to 4 10-minute quarters, which
No,
is something the women already do
no,
on
no,
their side of the NCAA.
no, no, no.
David, I did not say we should, warp to half courts like they do for the women's game.
I don't like quarters. In my opinion, the NBA, it should be 24-minute halves. Even in football, and I do like college football, I don't like quarters. Just put just play two 30-minute halves. A quarter is another unnecessary timeout.
I'll tell you what. The best reason to add quarters was a great scene from last season in one of the women's games where one of the women's players scored a basket as the clock ran out at the end of, I believe, the third quarter, or maybe in the first quarter. At the end of the first quarter, scored a basket as the clock ran out and proceeded to run into the locker room straight from the court. It was just a classic moment, not realizing it was not halftime yet. We could have more of those if we go to quarters.
Aside from moments like that. But I don't know. I'm not a fan of quarters. I will. There are some youth leagues and rec leagues in basketball that use a running clock up until 2 minutes, and then it's for the last 2 minutes. It's not. What would you think of that?
Well, really, my thought here was really try to get rid of the fact that I think we're playing a different game in the last 2 minutes of the game. Maybe not the half, but at least the last 2 minutes of the game. It's a completely different game than the other 38 minutes on the clock, because it's not about offensive and defenses. It's about fouling and making free throws. And free throws, in my opinion, are not what the game of basketball should be about. The game of basketball should be about when the clock is running and when you're running the offensive sets and you're trying to score, or you're kicking it out for a shot, and you're playing a defense. And it comes down to, okay, I've got a 3-point lead. I did great in all that for the first 38, 39 minutes. Now I've got to do something else. I've got to shoot free throws. You don't spend the last minute of a soccer match doing penalty kicks. You don't spend. So why are we spending the last minute of a basketball game doing exactly that?
I mean, if you think it's bad now, just imagine what the rules were back in '83 when NC State was making comeback after comeback because teams were missing front ends of their 1-and-1s well after what would have been the double bonus in today's game. Rules do evolve.
Rules do evolve, and yeah, maybe David's idea here of enforcing the intentional foul more and getting a lot more of 2 shots on the ball would take care of it as well. But yeah, maybe I'm off the deep end. We'll find out.
Let's not forget, if it's like let's say a foul away from the ball, that should probably be automatic, 1 shot and then the ball.
Or 2 shots on the ball.
Wanted to go into one other topic, and David, I want to start with you with this, and this has to do with non-conference schedule and getting back to the game as it is actually played, as opposed to the game that is being played in my fantasy worlds. But we have out there 10 conferences that are what we consider a basketball-centric conference. We bring this up especially because we're only 2 days away from the first college football game of the season. But the Atlantic 10, Big East, West Coast Conference, Atlantic Sun, America East, Horizon, Summit League, the WAC, the Big West, both those at one point had football, they no longer do. The Missouri Valley Conference, which there is a Missouri Valley Football Conference, but it's unaffiliated with the Missouri Valley Conference for all other sports. Those 10 conferences don't play football, yet they do play basketball. And there's this period of time in November and December when all the other conferences out there are focusing on the football and trying to promote the football.
September, October, Jeff.
September, October.
Yeah.
September, October.
That's when they're playing football.
And November.
No basketball. Okay.
But what I'm talking about is the time when you've got the Big East. The ACC and the Big Ten and the SEC in October, in November, and in December want to focus on what's going on the football field. They don't really, because that's the big sport. The Big East doesn't have football going on anymore in November and December. Should it be doing something more to get its basketball product out there so that people, are actually watching it during this time of year?
Starting with me, I'm sorry I interrupted your thought, which was
Right.
correct, with my own thought, which wasn't. I was just emphasizing that I thought you were going to with the notion that in September and October the football brand is out there. So the Big E or the Big Ten, the Pac-12, these big football brands, they're on page one. They're in the thought process or the consciousness of the American sports fan. Basketball doesn't start to November. So there's this big time period where their brand isn't out there. And then even when it gets out there in November, like you said, it's on page 4. Like we're in the latter part of the football season, the playoff race is in. And basketball, as we have mentioned over and over and over again, as big as it is from the Super Bowl to the end of the tournament, it starts off with this little pop gun sensation. There isn't a whole lot of showcase. And we don't, as basketball fans, we want more showcase games in November and December, but isn't that especially true, and I think this is your point, Chad, for the 10 conferences that don't even play football? And why aren't there more showcase games? When you look at some of the Big East teams and some of the A10 teams, and these are multi-bid leagues. These are very good basketball leagues, and they're playing 8, 9, 10 home games. A lot of them are against non-competitive, non-intriguing teams. If basketball is your only sport, if there is no football, shouldn't that be even more of an incentive to get showcase games together? And should these 10 conferences do more because they are like-minded, because they don't really play football? Now, I realize there's some tiers here. Like the WAC and the A-Sun are not on the same level as the Big East and the A-10. So, an A-Sun Big East showcase doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But the Atlantic 10 and the Big East does. There's some natural rivalries within those leagues. Shouldn't there be more games in November and December? I definitely think there should be between these leagues.
Um, John S., your thoughts on it? Should there be more of these games?
Oh, I've been, as a fan of Xavier in both the Atlantic 10 and the Big East, I've seen both sides of the fence. So during the time in the Atlantic 10, I could certainly see why A10 fans had almost nothing to lose and everything to gain. But being on the Big East side of the fence, I could certainly see the argument as to why there's a little bit to be gained from beating Atlantic 10 teams, but it seems like the risk outweighs the rewards as far as perception goes in some of the minds of the athletic departments. Because I know this is something that David Griggs doesn't want to discuss, but more often than not, these bye games are used to help pad the budgets for many of these programs just because they don't have football as their showcase sport to bring in some money.
Well, the bye game argument can work for the Atlantic Sun, for the Summit League teams, the WAC teams. What about the Atlantic 10 teams? What about the Big East teams? What about your defending national champion here in Villanova? I mean, shouldn't they be doing more than simply playing, College of Charleston and American and whoever else they're going to be playing this year? Shouldn't they maybe be out there playing, doing something to get their name out there?
I don't think you have to worry about teams like Villanova and Xavier scheduling up, especially since there is going to be a lot expected out of both teams. But I wouldn't be expecting much out of a team like, let's say, Providence, who's going to be rebuilding, and St. John's, who is also in the midst of a rebuilding project of their own. But
Xavier might be a little bit outside, because if you look at Xavier's schedule, at least this year, it has a lot of showcase on it in the out-of-conference portion of the schedule, and Xavier fills their arena. But I remember seeing some games of Villanova 3 or 4 years ago where they were playing Delaware in December, and it didn't look like there were 3,000 people there. And Delaware wasn't a bad team that year. So when you look at maybe not Xavier, but some of these programs that are half empty throughout, like Valpo, for instance, or some of the A10 schools that are half empty for their out-of-conference games, and they say, well, we can't get showcase games, we can't get Power 5 teams in here. Well, okay, did you try getting – should there be more against other good basketball programs that are having the same problem?
Well, John T., let me get your thoughts on this. We haven't heard from you yet on the topic. Is there something more that should be done?
Well, number one, I'm sure Villanova's worried about my Penn Quakers, so that's why they're not scheduling anyone early on in November. They need to keep their focus.
Of course.
Number two, if you like the Big East and you like the Missouri Valley, I strongly recommend that you give a little props to Ben Jacobson of Northern Iowa. So he lost his 3 top scorers from last year because they were all seniors: Wes Washburn, Matt Bohannon, and Paul Jesperson. Pardon me. Does he retreat and play some cupcake schedule? Absolutely not. Northern Iowa's first 4 games involved the Puerto Rico tip-off, Arizona State to start, probably Oklahoma, and depending on how things shake out, Xavier. And a week later, they play Xavier as part of their schedule. You're telling me that that's a weak schedule? I understand that might be the outlier, but like...
I think they play North Carolina again. Isn't that the return
and
game
at
of North
Iowa,
Carolina this
it's
year?
a great schedule. Obviously, I think they are the exception to the rule, but like... Good luck, Xavier. Like, you're facing a tough Kearney team twice in November.
And that's because it's a non-bracketed game as part of the Puerto Rico tip-off that Griggs has also alluded to in the past.
Yeah. And again, like Northern Iowa, but okay, Wichita is a big brand. They do fill their arena. But, you don't see them playing, and I hate to keep picking on Xavier, Villanova, even Dayton, some of the better – you don't really see them playing some of the better Big East and A-10 schools. And I just think that there are showcase games out there within these 10 conferences that could make November and December a little more intriguing. And, again, they're kind of starting not on the front line because everybody else gets their brand out there early in September and October with football. Like Florida State is out there, Oklahoma is out there, Ohio State, Michigan. Whereas if you're Xavier, if you're Georgetown, if you're Wichita, you're not really in the sports consciousness until mid to late November, and even then you're not really at the forefront of it until January and really February. So I guess from a branding standpoint, these schools are different. And I don't really know. I kind of threw it out there as just sort of a roundtable question, and maybe the answer is nothing. Given that these schools have that in common, is there anything that they could collectively do to push themselves forward or to mutually benefit everyone?
Well, I guess one of the responses here is I mean, there are some showcases, not necessarily involving these schools, although the Gavitt Challenge involves the Big East. You've got the ACC Big Ten Challenge. You've got events like the Champions Classic that we, before one of the other mentioned, that's been extended for 3 more years. Are the ratings there to justify these big name games? Are people actually watching these games when it is still November and December, or is it kind of like, there's some tournament going on, there's some Puerto Rico Classic, but we don't care, it's still football season? And maybe there is no solution to that if the American public doesn't want to watch anything other than football at that time of year.
Yeah, the Champions Classic got real good ratings. I think like 3, 4. I mean, for basketball standards. And don't forget the Barclays Center Classic, which gave us Fordham and Boston College.
Yes, Fordham and Boston College. I cannot forget that. Maybe we get a rematch again this year. I haven't checked the schedule yet. Well, John T., is there some way to get the fans, or is the only way we're going to get it is when we have Duke versus Kansas, Kentucky versus Michigan State? Is that the only way to get people to watch basketball in November and December?
Depends on the type of fan you want. If you want the super fans like us, I think we'll watch Fordham and BC. I'm embarrassed to admit, any time of the year.
We'll watch Alcorn State and Cal Poly. Come on.
But yeah, in November, if I'm a just average college basketball fan, like I'm sure I'll watch my team, especially if I'm tight with my alma mater or whatever. I don't think that the average fan is going to tune in for any matchup that's not a blue blood matchup, because of Thanksgiving and football and holidays and other stuff. Like, I wish they would, but I don't think they will, frankly.
Well, John S., maybe that's just the reason we're not seeing it. Do you think maybe that's the reason we're not seeing it then? Is just they know that ESPN is not going to go ahead and put these games together if they think that there's going to be half-empty stadium and nobody watching.
Well, these seem to be more, showcase or would have become much more traditional games now for the past 10 to 15 years, seeing some of the Thanksgiving tournaments at least offer some programming alternative to football here.
I guess on that note, we've gone a little over half an hour now, so we're going to try to call it an evening here for our August session. We will be back next month with our September podcast, and then when we get to October, we're going to start with some of the preseason stuff. So we're getting closer and closer. But let me run through some final thoughts here. Let me start with you, David.
Well, I gave my final thought earlier. We just saw the Olympics. I like the Olympic spirit. I don't think it's the same spirit as a world championship. I would like to see college players in the Olympics. And I realize that, we might not win. Well, then we might not win. We'll crush the world in the world championships with our NBA players.
John S.
Yeah, apparently while David Griggs was either deported or out of the country, we heard some rumors that Senator Tim Kaine appears to be on board with reviving Kansas and Missouri. For those who don't know, Tim Kaine, who is the Democratic vice presidential candidate, he's a native of Kansas and a graduate of the University of Missouri, but somehow wound up as a senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia. So that's going to be some competition for Griggs and Miles here.
Well, that's part of their platform. So,
well, if he's going to revive that rivalry, I'll vote for him.
Okay, David Griggs is voting Kaine for president, even
though I'm running for president.
John T., any thoughts?
If you like a team that does schedule tough teams, I urge you to head north to see the Wisconsin Badgers. If I'm reading their schedule correctly, 7 power conference teams in a row to start the season. At Creighton, then the Maui Jim Invitational, which could possibly have Tennessee, Oregon, and the Tar Heels. Then they host Syracuse and Oklahoma before going to Marquette. That's an amazing. I can't remember 7 power teams in a row to start your season. I'm still awestruck, as you can tell.
Do we have Long Beach's schedule? It's always amazing. it might not be in a row, but they.
They do, and we'll be getting into some of the schedules as they get announced. I have one final thing I want to bring up here, and that is if you go to our website, you'll see our NCAA Tournament Survival Board that we showed last month in our podcast.
Yes.
There actually was an update. This week, we've actually had a rare increase in the amount of teams that are eligible to win the NCAA championship this year, up to 344 teams, as Alabama A&M, which had been temporarily on a postseason ban because of bad APR numbers, got their numbers straightened out. The NCAA has cleared them to be fully eligible. So we only have 7 teams in all Division I that are not going to be eligible for the NCAA championship this year. 344 teams. I believe, although I haven't double-checked, I believe that is a record. I don't think we've ever had 344 teams eligible to win the championship heading into the season. Only 2, amazingly, only Alcorn State and Savannah State on the APR ban list this year, which is, I believe, the record low since the APR has come into effect. The other ineligible teams being Hawaii, who's on a postseason ban, Abilene Christian, Incarnate Word, UMass Lowell, and yes, there's only 7 of them, but the Grand Canyon Antelopes are on that list still. We are still fighting for the waiver this season. We fought real hard last year. Maybe we can make that number 345. But on that note, I want to thank everybody for joining us again. On behalf of John T., John S., and David, I'm Chad Sherwood. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you again in September.